Is that everyone? Yeah.
Holly will come in a couple of minutes.
Pardon?
Holly will come in a couple of minutes.
Okay. So, to part 2. Yeah, I'll just point us in the direction of the refuge tree. So this is the refuge tree, which is it's sort of the lineage really of the movement in lots of ways, mythic in many ways too, and this is Sangharakshita here wearing a yellow kesa. And actually he's holding a case almost as if he's going to ordain someone. And these are his teachers. Okay, so so he has a place in the refuge tree. It sort of contextualizes it, and in a sense, it's Bhante, as he's sometimes called, is he's the founder of our movement. And in a sense, everything and everyone on the refuge tree has had a part to play in the movement being what it is. Yeah. So, Bhante's sort of drawing on all his lineage, his teachers and his inspiration and the wider Buddhist world. Yeah. It's a really lovely painting. Is this one of Aloka's?
No, it's Chintamani.
Okay, yeah.
Chintamani, sorry.
Yeah, Chintamani, yeah. So, the basic sort of formulation is the same, but obviously different artists bring their own creativity to it. And then here is a picture of Sangharakshita in his traditional robes, because he was ordained as a monk in the 40s, 50s. So that's a picture of him there. And then there's another picture here, which is one I have on my desk at work, which I really like. I got it when he, at his funeral, which was some years ago now. And I really love it in looking at this. It's quite beautiful red flower. And this is certainly very much towards the end of his life. In the last few years. I'll pass that round if you've not seen it, but I do particularly like that picture of him. It just really sort of resonates with me. So I'm going to be talking about my relationship with Sangharakshita. It's not an in-depth critique or anything of that ilk. It's really perhaps quite a personal talk, really, about my connection with him and how he inspires me. And I guess I hope some of that might rub off on you, So yeah, as I said, it does feel a little bit more personal than I intended, as I was writing about it. Actually, I was really reflecting on my relationship with him and some of his sort of teachings that have particularly become cornerstones to my own practice. So I'll be drawing on some of them as I talk. So I can't remember the first time I came across Sangharakshita. I got involved in the movement in Sheffield in 1993, which was some time ago. Well, is that 30 years ago? Yeah. And I don't remember him suddenly appearing and me sort of noticing him as such. But I probably do remember one of the earlier talks. They were on tape in those days. That says quite a lot. And it wasn't a particularly inspiring talk. I think it was the visualization of the stupa. And I suspect I probably would have thought, oh, he sounds a bit odd, something about his voice that was a little strange for me at that time. And so that would have been around about 1993. And as I said, as far as first impressions go, it wasn't a particularly sort of strong one. I didn't think, wow, or there wasn't sort of flashing lights or anything like that. I don't think it really dawned on me that, the significance of who he was, actually. Yeah. As I said, the founder of the movement, Taratnam. So in some ways, it's quite hard to sort of reconcile that sort of quite neutral response to him and comparing, the sort of response I have to him now, which is sort of very different, really, which I'll say more about. But in the sort of early 1990s, I was definitely looking for a teacher. I was really clear on that. I wanted someone, if you like, to show me the way. I needed someone to navigate me. I was feeling quite lost. And I just read a book by someone called Dan McMillan. I can't remember the book. It was probably quite new agey. But I'd read in a journal or article somewhere that Evelyn Glennie, who was a very famous percussionist, had read the book, and it had really inspired her. So I thought, I'll give that book a read. And I think it did resonate on some level, but I think the conclusion I came to after reading this book was I wanted a teacher. I wanted someone to guide me. I needed someone to show me the path, if you like. And because I was sort of very lost. And I was very overwhelmed with anxiety, actually. I was probably in my late 20s, and I was just really overwhelmed with a lot of anxiety, which still, I wouldn't say I'm overwhelmed by anxiety now, but it's something I still have to work with. So I was living in Sheffield, and I came across this poster advertising meditation. I'm sure we've all perhaps found something of that ilk that's led us here. But there was something very appealing about this particular poster. It was a picture of Tintin meditating. And it just really appealed to me. He'd got his sort of quiff, and he sort of sat there, very cartoon-like. And I think it just appealed to my sensibility at the time. I think if it had been a picture of the Buddha or some other Buddhist imagery, I probably wouldn't have responded the same. And I'll say a bit more about that as I talk. So there was this picture of Tintin meditating, and I think I have actually got the book where I think it's called something like Tintin Visits Tibet, and there's these Tibetan monks, and it's a sort of a typical Tintin adventure, in another culture, in another part of the world. So I think it tapped into probably some of my childhood, joys, actually. Yeah, I remember when watching TV programs, Hergé's Adventures of Tintin, it really sort of appealed to me.
And Snowy.
Yeah, and Snowy the dog, yeah. And Captain Haddock and the Thompson twins, yeah. So I started learning to meditate, that was where it started from. I don't think at that time I really felt inclined to becoming a Buddhist or really had that much interest in it. But so I was looking for a teacher, and I came across this poster, and I learned how to meditate. And yes, of course, my first experience of that was a bit odd as well. People like me wearing these, I thought, what's all that about? strange experience. Again, I think I was a bit uncomfortable in lots of ways, and a bit out of my comfort zones. And I think Tintin was in my familiar zone, if that makes sense. Yeah. And of course, I slowly got more involved in what was then called the FWBO, the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. So again, I can't really recall a specific moment when I came into contact with Sangharakshita, who became my teacher, who became my inspiration. But I do remember a particular talk. Actually, I think it wasn't a talk, it was a book, and it was called Mind Reactive, Mind Creative. And it had a really big impact on me. I think I felt I was caught up in a reactive cycle, and I think anxiety can be like that, where you're just reacting to stimuli, unpleasant stimuli all the time, or interpreting it as unpleasant. And it had a real impact on me. So I'll just say a little bit about that. So the reactive mind does not really act, it only reacts. I think that was really significant. It reacts through the stimulus of the five senses. And I think the fact that I could have a different experience, one that was more creative, really captured my imagination. And even revisiting this earlier teaching this last week, I was really struck how it just felt like I'd gone to a different level of understanding about it. I think that's really helpful to keep revisiting some of your earlier teachings that have inspired you and just letting them settle, and then just having a very different or deeper understanding. So the creative mind does not need a stimulus. It functions spontaneously. It responds rather than reacts. And that really spoke to my heart. That I could have a more expansive experience rather than a restrictive one. And I think when you're anxious, which I was at the time, anxiety can really narrow your experience. So there was something about being able to have a more expansive or wider experience that really sort of spoke to my heart, or even the microphone. Yeah. So again, this talk, it's about my relationship with Sangharakshita. It's quite a personal one, and in some ways I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it, because I don't think I've really spoken about, Bhante in these sorts of terms, really. But what I will do is sort of point out significant milestones in my relationship with him, and how I've come to understand him to some extent, and how he's sort of helped me to become the person that I am. So again, I can't even remember I think I can remember the first picture I saw of him. It might have been him as a monk, holding, his head is shaved and he's holding this sort of rather large alms bowl. You often see pictures of him like that. And again, I don't think it really appealed to me. It wasn't particularly sexy, if I'm really honest. And that's not being disrespectful. That was just my response. And I was rather shallow back then as well. So yeah. Anyway, I sort of continued to listen to his recordings, and I think something started to sort of settle in. But I think the recording that's really had a really huge impact on me has been the quite infamous talk he gave on Padmasambhava Day in 1979, where he's just being very playful and very humorous, and I listened to it again, bits of it the other night, and he's just chuckling all the way through it as he's sort of talking about these demons and describing these demons and telling this story about some guy called Morris, and it's just very appealing. And for me, there's something about his personality that started to really have an impact on me. I am someone who really likes humour, and Bante's humour really appeals to me. There's something about his humour when he's in that kind of playful state that just really sort of, I think it really warms my heart in some way. I think he started to become more human, you know, like a real person, not like a mythic figure. Anyway, I listened to these recordings, and occasionally, you know, I'd come across a really significant one that really appealed to me. And I think I just want to say this, actually. I'm just so grateful for Arlander, who was one of Bante's very first disciples, who took the initiative to record all his lectures. You know, I just sort of think, God, where would we be, you know, without all those recordings? I mean, it's phenomenal, really, but it's so easy just to take these things for granted, you know. So as I said, I really like Bante's humour, and I think that's really cultivated my growing warmth towards him. So the next significant milestone was when I first met him. So I was living in the community in Sheffield, and this would probably be about 1999, I reckon. And I remember I was in the kitchen, and Amoga Vanksa, he was probably making, you know, tea or something. And he says, "Oh, Bante's in there." You know, I think, "Oh my God, you know, Bante's in the community." You know, he says, "Oh, go in and say hello." And I thought, "Oh God," you know. So I sort of, you know, plucked up a bit of courage and knocked on the door and walked in, and Bante was sat in the corner of the room in his chair, and I just sort of, you know, went right up to him and just, "Oh, hello, Bante," and shook his hand, and he'd got this sort of amazing smile, and I often reflect on that, and it just had quite a profound effect on me, actually. I sort of almost feel myself feeling quite emotional about it. I just felt like he saw me. It's quite hard to describe. I felt like he saw me, and I felt like he was interested in me. And of course, after that, I got really self-conscious, and I don't even remember what I said. Yeah, I probably become a sort of babbling wreck after that, and probably sort of decided to leave him to it. But initially, I felt like he met me and I met him. And again, it had quite a profound effect on me. It was something quite simple, but again, I think it helped me to see him as a real person. Yes, okay, he's the founder of our movement and my teacher, but I just felt like I started to see him as a person. Yeah. Yeah, he just had this very kind and quite ordinary presence about him. And yeah, I was very, very struck by that. You know, he was interested in me. And I think, I mean, a big part of my practice is doing the Metta Bhavana. And as I said earlier, yes, it is about cultivating positive emotion, but the thing about metta, actually, it's about being interested in someone. You know, in some ways it is quite ordinary, you know, just being interested and curious about someone. And again, I felt like he just seemed interested in me. Yeah. So again, another sort of significant moment. I might have got some of these dates a little wrong. I don't know whether I wrote to him before I met him or after, but I definitely wrote to him. And And my interest was that he'd been in the boys' brigade and he'd been in the band, and I'd been in the band in the boys' brigade. So I was just curious, and I wrote to him, and I was just curious to know what he'd played, what instrument he'd played, and he played the drum, the same as me. And again, I just sort of felt connected with him, and in this letter with his very, very beautifully handcrafted signature, he talked about how awkward it was playing the drum, and how, it's banging against his leg, and because every Sunday, the boys' brigade band would parade before church and after church. And it was just very nice just to hear him talking about his experience, really. And in some ways it felt very personal, actually. I don't know whether anyone else knew that he'd played the drum. I think he'd shared that very openly that he'd been part of the boys' brigade, but I don't think he'd shared specifically the instrument he'd played. So again, it did feel like personal that he'd shared something with me. And again, it just sort of reinforced this sort of connection I had. And I've still got the letter. In fact, I thought I'd lost it, which would have been a sad thing. And then suddenly it appeared, and I reread it, and I'm so glad I've still got it. Really, I should frame it because I wouldn't want to lose it. So we'd both played the drum in the boys' brigade band. I mean, it sounds quite trivial in a way, but it just sort of felt like it personalized something for me. And I think in some ways, this is perhaps what I'm talking about, is finding that personal connection. And I felt like I could relate to him more. I mean, having been in the boys' brigade, there's certain things that would have accompanied that Bhante would have shared, And I think it sort of really helped me sort of westernize him a little bit. Like I said, I haven't felt always comfortable with seeing him in his robes. But when I sometimes when I see him, like in that picture wearing what I might call more traditional westernized dress, it just sort of resonates with me a little bit more deeply. Having said that, I don't have such a strong reaction as I did seeing him in his robes now. And in fact, that picture over there I really like. I suppose I've worked with my own familiarity and comfort zone and been able to sort of expand that. So I'm just so grateful for Bhante being able to bring a Western psychological perspective to the Dharma. I think if I'm really honest, I don't know whether I would have taken to Buddhism without that, if I'm really honest. I mean, of course, one doesn't know, but I feel like I'm so grateful for his integration of Western psychological thought, for example, the likes of Carl Jung, which again really helps me to forge that connection. And and I think now I'm sort of practicing psychotherapist, that connection feels even more important to me, really. I do feel in some ways more integrated because he was able to bring a sort of a Western psychological perspective to it. And it certainly helped me make sense of that kind of traditional Buddhist viewpoint, Which sort of reminds me about, mind reactive, mind creative. That wasn't a traditional Buddhist view. Bhante kind of created that. I don't think there's anything in the Buddhist world that talks about mind reactive, mind creative. That was a formulation that Bhante brought. So the other really significant impact Bhante has played is on his sort of encouragement of the arts. and Western, and well, all culture really around the world. But I think at that time when I came across the movement, I wasn't particularly very well cultured. I think I pertained to wanting to have a relationship with the arts, but I don't think I really had one. And I think getting involved with the movement really brought me more into relationship with, particularly with theatre and literature and art and music. And I'm so grateful because it really sort of forms a real big cornerstone to my life now. And I don't know where I'd be actually without the arts, and I'm so grateful for Bhante for really introducing me to it, because I sort of make most sense of things really through the arts now. I bring the arts to my practice. I write most days. I'm a practitioner of theatre, and I don't know if I would have really been where I am without him, actually. So in some ways, I feel like he's sort of helped to cultivate a cultural identity in me that I didn't really have. I felt like he gave me permission, actually. I felt like he gave me permission to do this. And like, he didn't come down and we didn't have a conversation about this, but it just felt like I felt encouraged, actually. I felt really encouraged to open myself up to a different world, to the one I'd experienced. I started my life off as a civil engineer, so it was quite a different place, whereas now I'm a drama therapist. So, and Bhante really has sort of helped me to forge that path, So I think having more of a relationship with the arts, I felt like it helped me get more in touch with my emotions. I think I had quite an alienated awareness, where my kind of intellect and my emotions were really kind of split apart. They weren't really communicating to each other. So one of Bhante's quite famous aphorisms really forms the cornerstone of my practice, which is finding emotional equivalents to our intellectual understanding. And certainly for me, my intellect's often miles ahead of where I am emotionally. It takes quite a while for my emotions to catch up with my intellect. And of course, mind being what it is, I'm never where I think I am anyway. Yeah. So, I'm just so grateful. And as a writer and author, I find that that's really helped me forge that kind of disparity. Yeah, I felt like I've been able to bring those two together. And when I was sort of a couple of years leading up to my ordination, I was very involved in performing, and I think performing and being involved as a performer of theatre, it really formed the cornerstone of my journey to ordination. I was very lucky in that respect that I could bring my two worlds together, and it just helped me stay in touch with my emotions. Yeah. So again, another sort of in that theme around the arts and emotions, I felt like Bhante, certainly for me, was encouraging me to see the Dharma as poetical. And I think that really helped me, because sometimes the presentation of Dharma doesn't always appeal to me. So being able to bring an artistic lens or a poetical lens has really helped me make sense of it and helped me to respond to it. Particularly when I was reading the Survey of Buddhism, which is one of Bhante's earlier publications, which is quite a weighty, very weighty. And I remember, I don't know whether I got this from Bhante or not, but I felt like I'd read or heard somewhere to read the survey as if it was a poem or have a poetical stance on it, and it just came to life. It just felt like I could just engage in it in such a deeper way by just having that kind of poetical stance on it. So again, another really important feature for me in one of Bhante's quite famous aphorisms is this sort of idea of more and more of less and less. Can't say it's something that I've really got to grips with intellectually, emotionally rather, but again, there's that sense of it's kind of there in my being, and this sort of going deeper into my experience. So a bit like, as I said earlier, when I was rereading, rethinking about mind creative, mind reactive, there's this sense of going over it again just deepens my experience. And I really like that deepening. I am someone who quite likes thinking quite deeply, so it really helps me to sort of, kind of look more closely, rather than just taking in more and more and more, And I think there's a danger, particularly in our current age. We've got so much to read. We've got so many, authors, in our movement alone, who are writing about their experiences of being a Buddhist. And it's so easy to want to just grab another book, and just neglect those sort of core teachings that really resonate with us and just go deeper with them. We don't really need much to practice. Another book ain't going to do it, And I think for me, I have got these cornerstones to my practice that really help me to go deeper and help me to stay on that path, because I think it's so easy to sort of drift for me. Are we okay? Yeah. Is it okay? Yeah. I'm just checking in with you, because there are stepping off points, and that could be one. Yeah. So again, Bhante's presentation of the Dharma has just really helped me find ways to approach the Dharma and plug into my own particular personality. So I suppose in a way I've responded to those parts of Bhante that plug into parts of me, And I think the way that Bhante has presented the Dharma, I think that's possible for everyone. I think there's always something about the way he's presented the Dharma that different people with different inclinations and different personalities can plug into. I'm just talking about the bits of him and his teachings that have plugged into me. So the other thing that really has inspired me is his discipline. I really like discipline, and I'm not bad at it in some areas. And I find that really inspiring. And I've just finished reading Naga Bodhi's book, The Boy, the Monk, the Man, which is a sort of particular perspective that Naga Bodhi had on Sangharakshita. And in it said that Bhante always made time to read, write, and listen to music every day. And I was really inspired by that. But it was that discipline, that part of him that maybe he needed to nurture, those loves that he had. And Bhante, I think for most of his life, until his eyesight failed, I think he wrote 500 words a day. He made a real discipline of writing 500 words a day. And I have tried that. It's not easy. But you know, we're talking it's a couple of hours, 2-3 hours, I reckon, to polish up a bit of writing. You know, 500 words. And the other practice, the other thing that really inspired me, which I have spoken about before, is, and I don't know when I came across this, but as soon as I think someone else talked about it, and as soon as I heard it, I thought, oh, that sounds like a good idea. He said, if you do the Metta Bhavana every day for 10 years, you might get somewhere. I was really inspired by that. I thought, oh, that could be, that's the kind of experiment that I might like to try. And again, it sort of taps into that part of me that likes a challenge, but also a kind of a discipline, something to apply myself to. So, like I said, initially I didn't warm to him, but over the years I've warmed more and more to him. And I've sort of reflected on that, and I feel like I've just positively bore him more and more in mind. There's parts of his personality and his approach to the Dharma that have really resonated with me. And I've just sort of kind of connected with that and stayed with that. And my relationship with him has just grown, really. And I feel like I have a very strong response to him. Even though he's no longer with us, I feel like my relationship with him feels very alive. It feels like it's ongoing. You know, we're fortunate enough to be able to access still quite a lot of reading about him. You know, like I said, that, you know, the recent book by Naga Bodhi. And as soon as it came out, I wanted to read it. You know, I thought, oh, I just want to know more about him, you know. So again, it feels like an ongoing thing, an ongoing relationship. And even though at that time, so basically I was ordained 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't feel like I really needed to see him, actually. I felt so confident about my relationship with him. Seeing him didn't really feel like important to me. However, I decided I would see him, and I'm so glad I did. So I think I was at Adhisthana. It was only 3 or 4 months after I'd been ordained. And, you know, I got the call to go and see him. And again, he was sat in a chair, and he just gave me this very, very warm greeting. And I felt, in some ways, I felt quite relaxed with him, actually. And I think it was because I just cultivated this very healthy sense of him. And in some ways, it was quite ordinary and extraordinary. And I remember talking about my ordination and the vow that I took, and I was sort of very struck that Bhante had taken the same vow I had. And, you know, we had a sort of conversation about that, but it felt really significant to me that we'd shared that same commitment to the 3 jewels, that we were both taking refuge in the Dharma, the Buddha, and the Sangha. But what really struck me is I was very keen to talk to him about theatre and in particular drama therapy. And I was amazed. He just seemed to get it, you know. Well, that was my understanding of it. And I thought, you know, just talking about drama therapy, I didn't really tell him what it was. I said, oh, you know, I'm a drama therapist. And he looked at me and he says, yes, he says, I think this drama therapy is a very good thing because we've all got a dark side. And I was like really quite struck by that. And And I do have a sort of tendency to have an interest in the kind of shadow parts of our personality, you know, those darker aspects of our personality. But in some strange way, I just sort of felt like he was giving me some kind of commission, you know, or permission, you know. And I have to say, on one level, I haven't really gone very far with it, but on another level, I have. But I just felt like he was sort of giving me permission just to explore, you know, those darker parts of my personality, you know, some of those archaic and unrefined urges, you know, that we all have. And it has again become a real cornerstone of my practice. And you know, often, you know, when I do talks, you know, I do quite like to be provocative, and you know, and I do quite like that sort of mischievous, if you like, part of myself, and sharing the Dharma and a practitioner of the Dharma. So again, it was quite a profound meeting, but on another level, it was just very, very ordinary. And I felt very at ease with him. And I remember at the end of our 25 minutes, he said to me, he says, "Oh yes, it would be good to see you again." And it just sort of felt like he really meant it. It didn't feel like he was just placating me or just saying that, or that was what he always said. It felt like he really meant it, and that he didn't want to see me again. I never did, but it just sort of felt like genuine. And again, it just sort of increased my faith and confidence in him. So my relationship with Bhante didn't come fully formed. You know, my first experience of him wasn't like, oh wow, oh my God, he's amazing. It's something I've kind of more and more turned my attention to. You know, I have worked at it, not necessarily in a sort of hard way. I've just warmed to the bits of him that really resonated with me and built my relationship up with him. But, you know, there's also been some tricky times, you know, not just sort of coming up to my ordination, some of his sort of, his past emerged, you know, and some of those parts of his history that hasn't been easy to sort of digest and be with. And it was a bit uncomfortable for a while, but actually I do feel like it's like any other relationship in a way. You have to go through some tricky times. And I'm not someone who does trust easily. But I don't think it had a significant impact on undermining my confidence and trust in him. Yeah, even though it was unsettling at the time. So as I've said before, I sort of feel like, there's been a journey, and I'm aware I'm talking about him as if I've got as if we've been buddies or something, but in some ways it does feel like that. You know, he is my teacher. You know, I have no doubt about that. He is the teacher I was looking for. You know, and he's put me not on just one path, but many paths. And I wouldn't be the person I am, I believe, without him. You know, he is my inspiration. And again, I feel like he was interested in me. Yeah. And, you know, and I've seen him as my teacher, but I've also seen him as a human being. You know, in some ways, he's my Kalyana Mitra. He is my spiritual friend. And, you know, and I'm very grateful for all he's done, really. And for giving me a little bit of time, you know, just an odd letter, you know, the opportunity to meet him. So I thought I'd end with him sort of sharing something. It's from the book, The Boy, the Monk, the Man. And actually, I only read this on the way here, and I thought, oh, that would be a good place to start. So just before that, Naga Bodhi does talk towards the end of his book about, Bhante being on the refuge tree, and sort of creates an argument for why he is there. And then he sort of ends with Bhante speaking in 1990. So I'll just read it, and I quite enjoyed it. And again, just allow it to do whatever it needs to do in your response. It's partly because I am a rather complex person that I am a mystery to myself, even if not to others. But though I am a mystery to myself, I am not. I think so much of a mystery to myself as to cherish the many illusions about myself. One of the illusions I have about myself is that I do not cherish, that I was the most suitable person to be the founder of a new Buddhist movement in the world, as it turned out. I possess so few of the necessary qualifications. I laboured under so many disadvantages. When I look back on those early days and think of the difficulties I had to experience, I cannot but feel that the coming into existence of the Western Buddhist order, or Taratna, as it became, was little short of a miracle. Not only did the lotus bloom from the mud, it had to bloom from the mud contained within a small and inadequate pot. Perhaps it had to bloom just then or not at all. And perhaps this particular pot was the only one available. Now hundreds of lotuses are blooming. Some of the bigger and more resplendent flowers being surrounded by clusters of half-open buds. During the last 30, 40 years, a whole lotus lake of them have come into existence. Or rather, a whole series of lotus lakes. Alternatively, during the last years, the original lotus plant has grown into an enormous lotus tree, not unlike the great four-branched Refuge tree, has in fact grown into a whole forest of lotus trees. Contemplating the series of lotus lakes, contemplating the forest of lotus trees, and rejoicing in the strength and beauty of the lotus flowers, I find it difficult to believe that they really did all originate from that small and inadequate pot, which some people wanted to smash to bits, or cast into the dustbin, or bury as deep as possible into the ground. In brief, dropping the metaphor and speaking quite plainly, when I see what a great and glorious achievement Taratna represents, despite all its manifest imperfections, I find it difficult to believe that I could have been its founder. Okay. 9:29 and 58 seconds. Okay.